Today, I want to talk to you just really a few minutes about issues of compatibility in engagement and marriage. A lot has been written about this, a lot has been said about this, but there are some ways of looking at this that are very important. There's some assumptions that people think that compatibility is about being alike. It's not always about being alike. In fact, places where you're alike can be places of incompatibility. But the major issues in marriage that tend to cause marital unhappiness and even marital breakdown have to do with love, sex, and affection, finances and resources and living standards, your lifestyle, your values, your spiritual inclinations and how you want to live your life out. Stress is a big factor, and the way that people respond to that. Communication is obviously a big issue. Sometimes it's its own functional issue that people just don't know how to communicate very well, or their personality styles don't lead to it. Other times communication really isn't the issue. It's a symptom of other issues that we tend to pin on communication, but that's really not the issue. Sometimes I have people that talk to me about, we've got a communication issue, and then I get them to tell me about it, and it comes down to what I tell them: you don't have a communication issue. It's what you're saying to each other is very hurtful. You're communicating quite well in terms of what you're trying to say, but your hearts are ugly toward each other. So when you communicate, you're hurtful in what you say. And then the other is not generally identified, although in Christian circles more so, and that's just a lack of grace. I believe that grace is the most important component of all relationships, beginning with our relationship with God, because without it, nothing else matters. I can't be good enough if your grace is not enough for how far I can reach. And at any given time in our life, it requires a tremendous amount of grace. Otherwise, we just keep raising the bar and we end up exasperating our mates, just as Paul talked about in Ephesians 6, fathers, don't exasperate your children. If you keep raising the bar and demanding more and more and more, the best child is going to feel a failure and give up or burn out. So I want to talk about some issues of compatibility. I want to just mention a number. I'm not going to go deeply into them, because these things are very complex, and ways of thinking about it can be helpful to look at those that might be more significant with you and perhaps your significant other, either in considering becoming engaged or considering becoming married, or if you're already married in listening to this. But the first are some personality issues I want to mention and discuss briefly, and then I want to talk just for a few moments about some deeper issues that you might consider. The first is the issue of being collaborative versus independent. Some people are very independent. Just ask yourself, in your time of rejuvenation, had you rather be with other people, or at least with another, or would you rather be alone? When you think about what a really fun day looks like, is it a day that's planned out with other people, or is it a day that you get to choose what you want to do all day long, including be alone? Many people are quite independent. Many people are very collaborative, but all of these components in terms of human behavioral distribution fall on the typical bell curve. Most people are kind of in the middle. Sometimes they lean a little one way, sometimes they lean another, and that's situational. But certain people tend to be very independent. A very independent person with a very collaborative person are going to have major conflict issues. Independent people will see collaborative people as clinging vines. They don't feel like they have any space, and that's going to make each of you frustrated, because these are not flaws within themselves, they're personality types within themselves, and God designed us to be a very diverse population. However, opposites don't always mean bad. In the typical worldly sense of marriage, we want to build a marriage that makes us happy and serves us well. Well, the Christian paradigm is not that way at all. So if you're particularly independent, you might consider being with someone that's a little more collaborative so that they will draw you back to the middle behaviorally with your children. Really independent parents struggle greatly with parenting, just as very collaborative parents struggle greatly with parenting, especially as teens begin to try to develop some independence. And mom or dad is bugging them to death, wanting to be with them and spend time with them and hang out with them and do things together. And the children begin to want to push away and develop some independence that's essential for maturity. So looking at that, you ask yourself those questions and think that way. I can tell you in my own marriage, I'm quite independent and Tana's quite collaborative. Tana's not extroverted. She does not necessarily want to be with a lot of people all at once. She's very reserved, but she likes to be with people. She's also an only child, and so she wants to be with people a lot of times and not be talking. She likes for me to just be with her while she reads and does other things. For me, it's like I'm more of a doer. That seems a bit a waste of time early on, but now I understand. I know she just wants me there. And I learned that about my children, that my children didn't always want to be engaging me, but there was a certain sense of security with my presence in the house. And so just being in the area was important to them. And so I learned to do things that were important to me during those times without engaging them, but being in their presence. The second is submissive versus dominant. Amiable people tend to be the more submissive people. Drivers tend to be the more dominant people. But again, as most of us are well aware, we're all very complex and we can react differently. We have secondary styles that often rival our primary style, so that we may look almost conflicted to people, particularly if our styles are opposite of one another. But in looking at this, again, there's some strength in a person that's more dominant, being with someone that's more submissive. But in the extreme, it becomes a very imbalanced relationship that can quickly become abusive and unhealthy to both, because the submissive person will not sharpen the dominant person, but rather they will feed it. And that person then will become a bit of a caricature of what otherwise is a good trait in terms of becoming pushy and seemingly bossy to other people, and things that will drive people away and lessen our influence in the home. It also causes great struggles with parenting, where one parent is being submissive and often will therefore be enabling with the children, and the other on the other extreme is dominant and very controlling over the children. And that will come back and cause tremendous conflict between the two people. Because by submissive, that does not mean that that person will kowtow. Submissive people often assert themselves through passive aggressive behavior, through subtle kinds of resentment and so forth. It can be passive resistant as well. So thinking about that part of the relationship, again, are we people that are compatible in that we understand that if I'm dominant, I really want to be more submissive and be in control of that rather than letting it control me. If I am too submissive, that I want to grow in being assertive and not be kind of that passive person sitting over there that's, always going to let somebody else do it. And then, by the way, blame them later if it doesn't go well. The next is introvert versus extrovert. Now, there are two dimensions of introversion and extroversion. The typical one we think of is the social dimension, that the extrovert is more outgoing, liking to be with people, more the introvert, less so, and perhaps even in the other direction. In the extremes of these get very ugly. In the sense of any of these can be very ugly. An extreme introvert can develop very easily what's called avoidant personality disorder, which is kind of the classic kind of recluse, very fearful of people. And it can obviously cause problems in a marriage if one is moving more and more away from that and not engaging. Again, whereas the extrovert can really damage a marriage by not allowing the us factor in it, always bringing people in and never doing things just as a couple, but always wanting other people around. That's an extreme that limits intimacy. The other way, I think that, again, most of us fall toward the middle, and we need to understand that. The second dimension, though, has less to do with the social and more to do with activity. The outgoing person who likes to do very outgoing things, climb mountains, jump out of airplanes, extreme snow skiing, doing, certain kinds of races and these new things that come out. They're always wanting something new and different and to go somewhere and do something, being stimulated. These people in the extreme will appear hyperactive to a lot of people because they feel this need for constant stimulation. Again, where the very reserved person on the other end of that scale is very stimulated sitting on the front porch listening to the birds out next to a lake. That's what they look for. I think that one of the best ways to really understand this is to think of what do you do to rejuvenate yourself. Extroverts want to be with people if they have a stressful day. They're the people that pack happy hour after work. The stressful day, they want to go sit, perhaps drink some that relaxes them, and just talk and laugh and play. These are people that like to party with a lot of people. The introvert, on the other hand, just wants to go, sit in a hot bath and read a book and sit on the porch and, sip whatever they sip. Maybe a glass of wine by themselves for some people, or a Coca-Cola or a glass of water, but just be alone. And then they're more prepared to be around people and move on through the day. That's on the social scale. On the other scale, it has to do with when you get off work, or you sitting around thinking about, I'm going to go to a wild and crazy movie, or I'm going to go parachute, or I'm going to go ride a roller coaster. Those are very outgoing things, that exhilaration. We sometimes think of very outgoing people as adrenaline freaks, if you've ever heard that expression. People that like to do things to get their adrenaline going, drive fast. Again, at the extreme, very risky behavior. At the other extreme, people that are scared to death of taking any risk. Well, again, you see in compatibility, those two things can be unnerving to each other. One can drive the other one completely crazy. And if either feels the inability to change, I would tell you that's not an advisable marriage, because it's going to be very hard, because those are things that deal with your happy factors. How do I rejuvenate? How do I bring joy into my life? What do I like to do? And one or the other is going to be feeling guilty. If I'm doing what really brings me joy and makes me happy and is fun, my mate is not happy, either because I'm not with him or her, or because on one extreme, I'm out doing things that are too risky for them. They're afraid of everything I do that I might get hurt. And conversely, if I'm sitting home with my mate, while she knits or reads a book quietly with classical music, which if I'm outgoing I probably don't like. I probably want to listen to something loud with a faster beat and something that stimulates more. I'm going to be sitting there twiddling my thumbs, and I'm not going to be happy. And she's going to feel, or he's going to feel guilty about that. So we don't get to have fun together, and it's hard to find that place of compatibility. And I believe that in marriage, one of the most important components after grace is that you have a place to have fun together. That there are these places that you meet to have fun. Many people certainly find that in the bedroom, in their sexual relationship, which is a great thing for people to develop. But there has to be more than that. Any one of these things can go away for reasons outside of our own selves. But if we have a place to have fun, the kinds of shows we like to watch, the kind of movies we like to watch, you have to have a playground in your marriage. The next is flexible versus conscientious. Conscientious people tend to see things in contrast, right and wrong, good and bad, in those deep contrast, whereas flexible people tend to see things as gray. Flexible people, if you say the sun is hot, they're going to say, how do you know that? They're going to want to discuss that. Well, that's an opinion. And they're going to want to discuss that, because to make an extreme statement in anything is probably just not going to be that comfortable to them. And so it's somebody that really sees things in stark contrast is probably going to be offended by the other. This is more often the case in my experience in marriage with a very conscientious wife who has a very flexible husband who she thinks is a nasty monkey because he doesn't see things as right and wrong, and probably uses words that she would never use, and talks about things and does things and wants to do things that she's aghast at. But I would tell you the converse is very true, and I've had other people come to me where the wife was very flexible and the husband was very conscientious. Again, conscientious people in the extreme become self-righteous. Flexible people in the extreme become amoral. There's just not any right or wrong. And so when you get two people here, this can be a problem, especially as they deal with their faith. Because again, conscientious people will look at faith being the most important thing to them in very sharp contrast, and the things that are right, and the things that are wrong. And if you disagree on those things, we're going to have really big problems, because no longer is it preference, it's spiritual, it's faith. So looking at those things, most of us are not extremely conscientious and most are not extremely flexible. I have known both. I have known people that in the extreme, everything was registered as a good or bad, a right or wrong, and there was just no bending. And I have known people and counseled extensively people that really had no inner sense of conscience about right or wrong. And what they were capable of doing in gratifying the sinful nature was shocking. And you're aware of that, but most people have never sat and been able to download from someone like that. But again, I think a lot of this comes down to being aware of who you are and then learning to style flex. Learning to style flex. Our fleshly nature is not inherently right or wrong, but we are given the charge, just as we are given the charge to subdue the earth or to master the earth, we're given the charge to subdue ourselves. It's what God said to Cain: if you do what is right, you will be accepted, but if you don't do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, but you must master it. We have to gain mastery over our sin. As Christians first, by accepting that we're sinners and accepting the love and grace of Christ through faith, that God is that good. But then being freed from the guilt and shame and fear of separation from God, we're free now to grow in the image of Him so that we can live out our fullest life possible in glory to Him. We certainly glorify God in trusting His grace, but we also glorify God in allowing that grace to teach us to say no to ungodliness and to live sober and upright lives in this world, as Paul said to Titus. So again, learning, we all need to be conscientious on those things of God, but we need to make sure that we don't make too many things right or wrong that aren't, because we become incompatible with too many people. You see this in religion a lot. Churches make things right or wrong that aren't, and they can no longer take communion together because somebody's taking it on Saturday night and that's wrong, or they're taking it on Sunday morning and that's wrong, or they're using fermented wine and that's wrong, or they're not using fermented wine and that's wrong, or they're using yeast bread or unleavened bread. And So we can't even take the communion that's intended to unite us together. Well, you can see how dynamic and volatile that becomes in a marriage where two people are just making all these rules where it's really not a rule. And in marriage, one of the most important things is it teaches us to stay soft and flexible so that we can grow, because growth is change. And if we can't change, we can't grow. And inflexibility is a sign of old age, physically and spiritually. The next I would mention is passive and assertive. This is problematic because assertive people will appear offensive to passive people, and passive people or non-assertive people will be absolutely frustrating to assertive people. You know, where do you want to eat? I don't care. I think you do. No, I don't care. What's wrong? Well, nothing is wrong. Yes, I can tell something is. No. You see, assertiveness can lead you into sin and saying things that don't need to be said. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only that which is helpful for building up others according to their needs. On the other hand, passive will cause us to be deceptive and downright lie. When somebody says is something wrong, and there is, because I don't want to assert anything, I say, oh no, I'm fine, you just lied. And so it creates a dishonesty in the relationship, an imbalance. Assertive people have to learn how to ask more questions and quit asserting so much. Passive people have to learn to quit asking so many questions or being too quiet and say things. How do you feel? What do you think? Assertive people can quickly become aggressive people. Aggressiveness in terms of communication is when the language somehow becomes menacing, it becomes insulting, it becomes threatening or hurtful in some way. Passiveness in communication is the failure to communicate your opinions, needs, or wants in a way that's helpful to the relationship. So aggressive, assertive people, if they don't feel like they're getting their point across, will begin to do aggressive things like yelling or threatening or accusing or belittling. Again, in the very non-Christian extreme, threatening with bodily harm and things like that. That's aggressive communication. Assertiveness is telling others what you think, what you feel, what you need, what you want, what works for you, in a way that does not unduly implicate them or judge them or belittle them or threaten them, so that we can negotiate. As if to say, sweetheart, what works for me is this, or what doesn't work for me is this. I can do this, but I can't go there. It's not to say because you want to go there, you're bad. It's to say this is as best I understand what works best for me, or what looks right or good or helpful to me or to our relationship or to our children or to the trip we're going on. But assertive people need to learn to ask more, to be more gentle, to not jump on things a less assertive person says, because it's going to make it harder. But each of you have to reach, because it's very frustrating to an assertive person to deal with a passive person. Again, I would tell you in engagement, one of the things that I really seek to do is to get people to identify those personality traits that might contribute to a weakness in the relationship, and then ask, are you willing to really work at this in terms of improving the relationship, and lean in and be flexible, to style flex in this way for the sake of building a relationship? And will you promise to never entrench yourself and just say you can't change? Because if this is an extreme conflict, then if that person will not commit to you unequivocally that they will never justify that in the extreme, then you probably want to walk away. Because again, in marriage, we have to grow together, and in any extreme thing, it's going to take more work to grow together. If we're in the middle, it makes it real easy for us, and most of the time we are. We're both leaning toward the middle. But in any person, you're apt to have some that are at least out a standard deviation away from the mean, out to the side, and you might be even a couple out there in that 2.5% extreme. And so those are things you want to identify. The assessments that we use in our pre-engagement can help you identify some of these in a more normative way and a less opinion way. The Taylor-Johnson looks at some of these kinds of components, and our pre-engagement counselors and our counselors on staff and so forth can help you work with those. Another one is being laid back versus high energy. I think I've talked about this enough in the introvert extrovert that you know what I'm saying. But some people are are going to have a higher anxiety level, and they may need to work off some of that anxiety. Some people are just very laid back and low energy. Again, there can be some compatibility in this, very helpful in terms of my own marriage. Tana is more laid back, as she likes to jokingly say, Ronnie's all work and I'm all play. Well, that's not the truth. She's just more sanguine, more expressive, more amiable. I'm much more of a doer and an analytical, but she has helped me to be a lot more laid back. I'm a healthier person because she has taught me that I don't have to work all the time, and that I can be laid back and have fun. Conversely, I have led Tana in a life of service and activity and things to get her to do things that she otherwise might not do. And people might not be aware of her giftedness in so many areas because, again, she can be non-assertive as well, and so people may not be aware. The next is low risk, high risk. Again, I've talked about this to some degree in introversion and extroversion, talking about outgoing or reserved. But some people like high risk. They like high risk financially. Again, I've seen this more with men and women being lower risk. But that, again, I wouldn't even argue that that's a normative social rule. It's just a personal observation in my own counseling work and inner observations of relationships. But some people, again, like financially, they want to invest money in stocks and play the market, where the other one wants to put them in treasury bonds. And can't stand the thought of losing $1. Well, you got real problems with that when it's that. One likes to drive really fast and the other one is screaming the whole way. It's kind of hard to go on a trip when you do that. Some people like to have a fast car. Again, I think you can see some of these things change with different kinds of social things, whereas men might be more willing, or certain personality types might be more willing to take a certain kind of risk, but really be reserved in another area, seeking low risk. The opposite might be true for the other one. There might be risk being taken in other ways that the other one may be uncomfortable with. But just being aware if there's extremes here. If the way one drives or lives or handles their money is a bit unnerving to you, some conversations need to be had to see if we can reach a mutually satisfying mean there between us. The next is intuitive versus objective. The Taylor-Johnson assesses this, but this can be very problematic because intuitive people take things very personally. Highly objective people may not take things personally that are personal. And may objectify things that really they need to look at personally. But I think we need to be a little bit both of this. We need to be able by decision to be objective when we need to be objective, because again, if somebody's hypersensitive, the truth can't come out. You can't say things, and they're going to assume that that what you're saying is, if they said the same thing, that's what that means. So if an intuitive person says something, it often is going to be really based on how they are. And so they assume, well, if you do that, then that's the way you are. For an objective person, it may not be that way at all. This is where a lot of communication problems come from right here. One is thinking intuitively based on feeling and observation and just this kind of inner amalgamation of past experiences. Does that make sense if I say that way? I just kind of put it all together and we call that our gut feeling. I would tell you intuition is very powerful because it's an activity of the right brain which assesses a whole lot of kind of subtle information and makes a projection. Our computer weather models work that way. Most of our weather forecasting is based on just that kind of artificial intelligence where the computers are constantly entering in all kinds of weather data, hundreds of components of data, and matching it to the outcomes. When this happened, these kind of storms happened. When this happened, this kind of temperature happened. Or these kinds of hurricanes happen. And the more data that's entered into the computer, the more accurate those forecasts are. Well, intuition is your mind's ability to do the same thing. Even things that you're not aware of, that you say something feels funny here. Well, your mind has registered some situation with a lot of those things that you are not aware of and is making a projection based on that. So that is what intuition really is. What we call déjà vu is a form of intuition where certain stimuli around you are registering that this is similar to a previous situation and you're picturing the outcome in your mind. I've been here before. So trying to look back and see what that is. The next is simple versus complex. Some people like to simplify everything. Others like to make things more complex. Some people are naturally more complex than others. These things are caused by a combination of a lot of other attributes, though. If your attributes tend to line up in a certain way, certain of those things will make you more complex than others. Complex people like to use, if I can use a math metaphor, they like to use calculus. They like to use quadratic equations. Very complex kinds of ways of thinking about the world around us, whereas simple people like to add, multiply, I should say add and subtract, and then if needed, multiply and divide a bit. But certain personality types are more prone to certain kinds of ways of thinking. This is an issue often between men and women because women tend to be more complex because women tend to be more intuitive. That is changing, I might tell you, because of the social forces in my observation. But with that said, I think just the kind of the trite joke about men not understanding women, some of that is because of the complexity of women's emotions. Women joke about that probably more than men do. But I think that if you're very complex, you need to learn to simplify things. Don't bring in so many factors. Try to think of the factors that really are relevant rather than just bringing up a whole lot of irrelevant things that may be true but may not matter. Try to think of the things that matter, whereas being simple, realize that a lot of times things just aren't that simple. Things do get complex, and an oversimplification can lead to some really bad things in the sense that there are dimensions that are not being considered that should otherwise be considered. Another is private versus public or open. I would tell you again, in our marriage, Tana is an only child that is a bit introverted. She is very private. She had a bedroom as big as half of my house. I was the youngest of 8. I had no privacy, and she had complete privacy. Even her parents were separated a lot of her life, and she had a house to herself because her mother worked. And so for me, I'm the youngest of 8 kids. I never had any, and I'm very public. In addition to that, I live a very public life as a minister. So it has brought a lot of challenges on us because I'm very open with my life. Well, when you're married, half of your life is your mate. And so the things that I share can often be sharing about her as well. Now, she's become much more comfortable with me sharing about our marriage. I try to be very careful not to paint her in a bad light, but only to be objective and use it where I can to bless and help others and teach. But again, we've had to find ways to make that work. I'm not the minister that has people over all the time, that has people living with us. I've learned to respect that. She would do that if need be in a heartbeat. And we have had people live with us, and we've done all of those things. But that's not where she's going to be most comfortable. So we found, I think, a really good balance in how to do that in our marriage, that I can live a very public life, and she comes with me into that world, and she can live a very private life in some areas, and I can go with her into that world. Is it always easy? No, we're both style flexing. But we style flex, and I think we've kind of found a comfortable place for us that we both feel good about our walks with God and our service to Him, but we both feel good about kind of getting some of those needs met. And we're both very respectful. If she needs more time at home and more time alone and more privacy, then I try to make sure she gets that. If I need more stimulation, if I need to be out, if I need to talk to somebody, she is always very understanding about me getting that. Another that we don't like to talk about has to do with intelligence. The intelligent quotient is an important measurement of how the mind can process and remember, but it's a very inadequate measure of intelligence. Some people have a much more academic processing intelligence. Some people have a much more practical, pragmatic intelligence. I think if we can couple those two things, we come down to what we might see as more wisdom. Intelligence in no way equates to wisdom. The world is full of educated derelicts, as one of our former presidents said, and I believe that to be true. However, in a marriage, if one is quite intelligent and stimulated by more art and more music and reading and things, philosophy, and wants to delve into learning and things like that, and the other one really is happy talking about recipes and what the day looks like, there's going to be some unhappiness there. I think in the college environment it helps because when you select somebody that's going to college, you probably have some view of their intelligence. If somebody can go to college and make grades enough to pass, they have enough intelligence to do pretty much whatever they need to do. Conversely, people that and so in that environment, by selecting somebody, that's usually not a problem, but I have seen it be an intense problem because it makes it really hard for somebody who has a very fast mind, thinks very quickly, to match up. And the converse is true for somebody that needs to think more slowly and needs to talk about it longer and doesn't catch on to things quickly. It's going to be very hard for them to feel gratified being with somebody that you talk for 2 minutes and they've memorized what you just said, as opposed to somebody says, now say that again. So really thinking about IQ. Another is defensive versus non-defensive. I'm going to say that in the best way I can. Defensive people are just really hard to live with. They're hard to communicate with because defensiveness grows out of a complex combination of other attributes. Usually it's rooted and driven by pride, although that within itself I wouldn't consider a personality component. I would consider it a character component that corrupts any of our attributes. It overarches it all. So learning to be non-defensive. Marriage requires us to be in the same fortress. And if either of us tends to retreat to our own fortress, it's going to inhibit and perhaps even destroy intimacy. We have to learn to conclude together. We have to realize that now we're a team, we're one, we have to decide together. And if one or the other refuses to do that in any way, it's going to immediately limit our ability to grow together. So just being aware of that in yourself and in other people. Again, if somebody is instinctively defensive, people that are highly conscientious, that are dominant, will almost always struggle with being defensive because they see things as right or wrong. They see things in contrast. They're dominant, and if anybody even infers that they might be wrong on that, they're immediately going to be defensive, and defensiveness usually leads to offensiveness. If I defend and that doesn't work, I will attack. And those are neither helpful things in a loving, godly, intimate relationship of people who are committed to serving and lifting up and making their partner have their best experience in God. There's some deeper issues I would touch on for just a few moments. I can't delve into them because they are very complex issues, but just things to think about. Family style, looking at how your potential mate's family does family. Some families are all over each other. They are all in each other's businesses. They talk. They live around each other. There's no secrets. Others' families are very distant, and they're just astounded that this other person wants to be with their family every Christmas and every holiday and every birthday. And if somebody's sick, they all go to the hospital. It'll drive them nuts. So you need to evaluate family styles, family traditions, how the parents communicated. If you want to get a good hint about what your mate is going to look and act like in 20 years, go hang around their parent of the same gender. That's not an equal thing. It can be very different, but I will promise you there are going to be some things about that person that your husband or wife is going to become. No matter how badly they don't want to. Genetics are a very powerful force. Psychology. This is an even more difficult one to talk about, but families develop a collective psyche in the way they think, in the way they communicate, and the way they influence each other. Some families influence through teasing. Some families influence through criticism. Some families influence through indirect things, talking to the others and expecting them to tell somebody else. Psychology sets up, and trying to understand a little bit more about the psychology of the person you're with. Some of the dimensions I gave you above can help you think about that. Physiology. I counseled some time back a couple. She was diagnosed in high school with Crohn's disease, which is a disease of the colon and the large bowel, and made her very sick. She was on steroids. On the outside, she was still a beautiful woman, but on the inside, she was a very sick woman. And in college, she attracted the attention of an athlete who was certainly looking for somebody that was nice looking, and he found somebody. She was somebody he wanted, but he was a bit Pollyanna and didn't really deal with the fact that she was very ill. On top of that, in social situations, it made it difficult because at times it was hard for her to control her bowels. She had to go to the restroom a lot. And so In this, she just had a husband that was trying to act like she was a perfectly healthy person, but inside she wasn't. For someone to marry somebody that's ill, there has to be a lot of consideration. Somebody that is disabled in some way. There needs to be a lot of consideration of just physiology. I would say that even further, certain kinds of sexual issues can come out of this, where someone has an unidentified sexual problem that makes intercourse painful, or that makes their breast overly sensitive, or some guy has a misshapen penis that's too small or too large, can cause a problem. We tend to want to snicker in back rooms about this, but when it's your problem, it's not funny. And these issues need to be talked about. And if you know you have an issue like that, or even think you do, you need to, number one, go to a doctor and find out how much of an issue that's going to be for you. I've had multiple people through the years in ministry come to me with issues that they were afraid of. One had a very, very severely curved penis, to use his own vernacular, and I said, well, of course I can't help you with that, but there are doctors that can. And so and that was a very embarrassing, painful thing for this young man, and he'd lived this life. He'd never spoken to anyone about it. And so he wondered if he would be able to marry and have a relationship and father children. And so I very quietly sent him to a urologist and said, go tell him this is what these people do. You're not gonna be embarrassed by him, and he's seen a lot more than you will ever think you've seen. So he's fathered multiple children, so I think that all worked out well for him. But when you're inhibited by that and fearful, but if it could have been a bigger problem than it turned out being. Emotions, somebody that's very temperamental and emotional versus somebody that is quite stoic, that can be a very frustrating problem. People that are very stoic need to learn to express themselves more, and people that are very temperamental kind of need to learn how to hold some of that in and not be so outwardly expressive about every emotion that blows by. Communication style, those are different ways of looking at that. The communication styles I use are action-oriented, thinker-oriented, people-oriented, or expressive-oriented. People that are action-oriented tend to communicate in terms of what is to be done or has been done. People that are thinker-oriented tend to communicate in facts and data. People that are people-oriented are just that. They're going to think in terms of the effect on people, and people that are expressive are going to be expressing, thinking in terms of outward expression and how it's going to look and feel. Conflict management style is another one. Everyone can learn to problem solve. Many people, their primary way is to force when they're in conflict. Many people, their technique is to smooth and allow the forcer to kind of have their way. Many people tend to avoid the conflict altogether, not to even engage. Hide, disappear, run off, walk out and slam the door and disappear and say, I'm not going to talk about it. None of those are effective problem-solving methods. All of them can be okay as strategies in the short run to get out of an embarrassing situation until we can sit down and solve the problem, but problem solving ultimately has to be the person of God's style. Belief system, I think we assume because somebody is a believer that's enough. It's not enough. We need to really examine our kind of belief system, and this is often very affected by our personality style. Conscientious people on one side will tend to see things in a much more fixed way, whereas flexible people, their belief system is going to accommodate that. We have to try as people of God to be very honest and not allow our personalities to shape our view of God. God is who He is, regardless of who we are, and we need to be shaped by Him, not try to shape Him in our image, which ultimately is idolatry. Behaviors and habits are important. Some people are not offended by tobacco use. Some are greatly offended by it. Some are not offended by some alcohol use. Some are greatly offended by it. Some people have nervous habits and tics and cliques, and it can drive some people crazy because they don't do that. You need to observe people's habits. That's why in the building of a relationship you have to get to know them better so that you begin to see other things that you may not be aware of. If you're living a godly life, you're not going to be aware that he throws his underwear wherever he takes them off and never picks them up. You're not going to know that. For some women, that is very unnerving. However, most guys tend to think that women are very clean and neat by nature and are just going to take care of them. And some guys move into a marriage and find out their wife is the opposite of neat and clean. And those things can be very frustrating. I am the kind of neat organization person in our relationship. Tana is very expressive and all those kinds of things, but she had never been taught an ounce of personal organization. Organization was stick it wherever it can go in a drawer or a closet or cabinet. And those drawers and closets and cabinets were scary. Tana's trunk was full of stuff. And I said, what is this stuff? And it's just stuff. If you go to our house today and go in the garage and open her trunk, it will be full of stuff. Only now it's in a basket and bags and things so that it's organized for all these things she's going to do with all this stuff eventually. She carried a pair of boots in the back of her car for years that she needed to take, and she was going to see if somebody could fix them. I'd sometimes secretly go get that stuff and throw it away, and then we have these great arguments, and I try to forget that I did it. So when she says, "Did you throw that away?" I don't remember. I don't remember doing that. And old age is a friend when you want to play ignorant. So the thing I would say in all of this is if you want to grow, you do need to find people that are different from you that can bring attributes to a relationship that you are not strong in. Because we're team members. If we don't become critical of the other in that, as though somehow their way is wrong, or they're too much this or too much that, and I can admire it and respect it and not be jealous of it, then we can come together in a relationship and combine our various traits. Again, many traits can be a great strength in certain situations and can be a great weakness in others. Many weaknesses will be weaknesses in certain situations, but in others become great strengths. So we have to think more complex, and we have to be more open-minded. And as I said, the most important attribute of marriage is grace, driven out of agape love. I would tell you arguably the second most important is the desire to grow and change, to be my best. If both of us can extend grace and both of us are willing to really grow and change and learn certain behaviors, we can build a very happy, compatible relationship. If we have a sense of humor, we can laugh about our human quirkiness as we would laugh about the funny animals in the zoo, and realize that's how we're fearfully and wonderfully made. So I would say grab for compatibility and embrace the conflicts in your relationship and stay open, and you can really work out a really compatible marriage that can help you both find peace and consolation as well as the challenge to change. So thank you very much, and I hope this blesses you all.